It was a Tuesday morning when Detective Sarah Chen walked into the Philadelphia Police Department and found something on her desk that made no sense. A phone record. Nothing unusual about that. Except this phone record showed 17 calls made from a cell phone on March 14, 2019. The problem? The owner of that phone, Marcus Williams, had died in a car accident on March 11th. 3 days before the calls were made. Sarah had been a detective for 19 years. She'd seen a lot of strange things. But this was different. This wasn't a mistake. The phone company checked 3 times. The calls were real. They happened. All 17 of them went to Marcus's mother, Patricia. All at exactly 3:47 a.m. Patricia answered every single one. And what she heard on those calls would haunt Sarah Chen for the rest of her life. Because this wasn't the first case like this. Not even close. Across America, families were reporting the same impossible thing. Phone calls from the dead. Always at night. Always at the same time. Always from people who had died days, weeks, or even months before. The calls lasted anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes. Some were just silence. Some were breathing. And some were voices. Voices that shouldn't exist anymore. This is the story of what happened when the dead called back. And why no one can explain it. But before we get to Patricia Williams and those 17 calls at 3:47 a.m., we need to go back 6 months earlier. To a small town in Ohio. To a woman named Linda Martinez. And to the first call that started everything. Linda Martinez was 62 years old when her husband died. Robert Martinez had a heart attack on September 3, 2018. He collapsed in their kitchen while making coffee. Linda called 911, but it was too late. Robert was pronounced dead at the hospital at 6:47 a.m. They had been married for 38 years. The funeral was 4 days later. Family came from all over the country. Their 3 children. 7 grandchildren. Robert's brother flew in from California. It was a beautiful service. Everyone said so. Linda went home that night to an empty house. She sat in the living room where Robert used to watch TV. She looked at his chair. His reading glasses were still on the side table. His coffee mug was still in the kitchen sink. She couldn't bring herself to wash it. That night, Linda went to bed around 10 o'clock. She was exhausted. Grief is exhausting. She fell asleep quickly. Then, at 2:23 a.m., her phone rang. Linda woke up confused. Who calls at 2:23 in the morning? She reached for her phone on the nightstand. The screen was bright in the dark room. She looked at the caller ID. Her heart stopped. The screen said, Robert Cell. Linda stared at the phone. It kept ringing. Her hands started shaking. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of error. Maybe someone had Robert's old phone. Maybe the funeral home hadn't disconnected it yet. The phone kept ringing. Linda's finger hovered over the answer button. She was terrified. But she was also curious. What if it really was Robert somehow? What if he was trying to tell her something? Linda pressed the green button. She lifted the phone to her ear. And what she heard next made her drop the phone on the floor. Linda Martinez told her daughter Maria about the call the next morning. Maria drove over immediately. She found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her nightgown. Linda looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking as she held her coffee cup. Maria sat down across from her mother and asked what happened. Linda took a deep breath and told her everything. When the phone rang at 2:23 a.m., Linda answered it. For the first few seconds, there was nothing. Just silence. Then she heard breathing. Slow, steady breathing. Like someone was on the other end, listening. Linda said hello 3 times. The breathing continued. Then she heard something that made her entire body go cold. A voice. Quiet. Distant. Like it was coming from very far away. The voice said her name. Linda. Just that. Nothing else. Just her name. And Linda swears to this day that it sounded exactly like Robert. The same voice she'd heard every day for 38 years. The same voice that said, "I love you," every night before bed. The same voice that was supposed to be gone forever. Maria didn't know what to say. She looked at her mother's phone. The call log showed the incoming call at 2:23 a.m. Duration, 47 seconds. Caller ID, Robert Martinez. Maria felt sick. She knew her father's phone had been in his pocket when he died. The hospital had given it to her mother with his other belongings. Maria had seen the phone herself. It was in a drawer upstairs. She asked her mother to show her the phone. Linda and Maria went upstairs to the bedroom. Linda opened the nightstand drawer. Robert's phone was right there. Right where it had been since the hospital gave it back. The screen was black. The battery was completely dead. It hadn't been charged in over a week. Maria picked up the phone. She tried to turn it on. Nothing happened. The battery was dead. This phone could not have made a call. So where did that call come from? And whose voice did Linda hear at 2? Maria Martinez did what any logical person would do. She called the phone company. She explained the situation to a customer service representative named Tom. Tom listened patiently. Then he put Maria on hold for 10 minutes. When he came back, his voice sounded different. Uncertain. He said he'd checked the account. He confirmed that Robert's phone had not been active since September 3rd. The day he died. No calls had been made from that number. Not to Linda. Not to anyone. Maria felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. So the call didn't come from Robert's phone. That made sense. Dead phones can't make calls. But then where did it come from? The caller ID clearly said, Robert's cell, with his phone number. Tom suggested it might be something called spoofing. That's when someone fakes a phone number to make it look like a call is coming from somewhere else. Scammers do it all the time. But Maria had a question. Why would a scammer call her mother at 2:23 a.m. and just breathe and say her name? What was the scam? Tom didn't have an answer for that. He apologized and said there was nothing else he could do. Maria thanked him and hung up. She told her mother it was probably just a technical glitch. A weird coincidence. Linda nodded, but Maria could tell she didn't believe it. And honestly, Maria wasn't sure she believed it either. That night Maria stayed at her mother's house. She wanted to make sure Linda was okay. They watched TV together. Ate dinner. Talked about Robert and happy memories. Around 10 o'clock, they both went to bed. Maria slept in the guest room. At 2:23 a.m., both of their phones rang at the exact same time. Maria woke up to the sound. She grabbed her phone. The caller ID said, Dad's cell. In the next room, she heard her mother's phone ringing too. Maria's hands were shaking. She answered the call. Put the phone to her ear. Silence. Then breathing. Then that same distant voice. But this time, it said Maria's name. And in the other room, Linda. By morning, both Linda and Maria were convinced this was not a technical glitch. Something was very wrong. Maria called her two brothers, David and James. She told them everything. At first, they thought it was some kind of prank. Maybe someone hacked their dad's phone number. But Maria asked them a question that made them stop and think. How would anyone know to call at exactly 2:23 a.m.? How would they know what Robert's voice sounded like? And why would someone do this to a grieving family? David, the oldest brother, said he would come over that night. He wanted to see this for himself. James, the youngest, said the same thing. That night, all four of them stayed at Linda's house. Linda, Maria, David, and James. They sat in the living room and waited. The house was quiet. Nobody spoke much. Everyone was watching the clock. At 2:20 a.m., the tension was unbearable. Linda held her phone in her hand. Her knuckles were white. At 2:22 a.m., the Martinez family decided to document everything. David, who worked in IT, set up recording equipment. Every night at 2:23 a.m., he would record any calls that came through. He wanted evidence. Proof that this was happening. For the next week, the calls came every single night, always at 2:23 a.m. Always to multiple phones. Sometimes it was just breathing. Sometimes it was the voice saying names. Once the voice said, "I love you." Another time it said, "Don't be afraid." The recordings were clear. David saved every single one. He played them back during the day. The voice was unmistakably their father's. The family tried everything to make it stop. They changed their phone numbers. The calls still came. They turned their phones off completely. The phones would turn back on by themselves at 2:23 a.m. and ring. They left the phones outside the house. They could hear them ringing from the yard. Linda even went to her priest, Father Miguel. She told him everything. Father Miguel listened carefully. He'd been a priest for 40 years and he'd heard a lot of confessions. A lot of strange stories. But nothing quite like this. He told Linda he would pray for Robert's soul. He said sometimes the dead have unfinished business. Sometimes they can't move on until something is resolved. Linda asked what Robert's unfinished business might be. Father Miguel didn't know. But he suggested the family think about Robert's last days. Was there anything strange? Anything unusual? Any arguments or secrets? Linda thought about it. Robert had been acting different in the weeks before he died. More quiet. More distant. Like something was bothering him. She'd asked him about it several times. He always said he was fine. Just tired. But Linda knew her husband. Something had been wrong. She just didn't know what. And now it was too late to ask. Or was it? That night at 2:23 a.m., when the phones rang, Linda answered. And for the first time, she spoke back. She said, "Robert, if this is really you, I need to know. What's wrong? What do you need to tell me?" The breathing on the other end got heavier. More urgent. Then the voice spoke. 3 words that changed everything. Check the basement. Linda Martinez hadn't been in the basement since Robert died. It was his space. His workshop. He spent hours down there working on projects. Building things. Fixing things. Linda almost never went down there. The next morning, Linda called her 3 children. She told them what the voice had said. Check the basement. They all agreed to go down there together. The basement stairs creaked as they descended. Linda hadn't turned the light on down there in weeks. The air smelled musty. Stale. Robert's tools were exactly where he left them. His workbench was covered with half-finished projects. A birdhouse. A picture frame. David asked what they were looking for. Linda didn't know. They searched for an hour. Looked through boxes. Opened drawers. Checked behind old furniture. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Maria noticed something. A loose floorboard near the back corner. She called her brothers over. David pulled up the floorboard. Underneath was a small space. And inside that space was a metal box. The kind you might use for important documents. David lifted the box out. It was locked. They searched for a key but couldn't find one. Finally, James got a screwdriver and forced the lock open. Inside the box were papers. Letters. Photographs. And a sealed envelope with Linda's name on it. Linda's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Written in Robert's handwriting. The letter was dated August 15, 2018. 3 weeks before Robert died. Linda read the letter out loud to her children. And with every word, she understood why Robert couldn't rest. The letter was a confession. 30 years ago, Robert had made a terrible mistake. A mistake he'd kept hidden from everyone. A mistake that had consequences Linda never knew about. The letter explained everything. Why Robert The contents of Robert's letter are sealed by a court order. The Martinez family won't talk about what was written there. All we know is what David told a local reporter 2 months after they found it. He said the letter contained information about something that happened in 1989. Something Robert witnessed. Something he should have reported to police but didn't. David said his father was protecting someone. Someone he cared about. But that protection came with a price. Guilt. 30 years of guilt. And that guilt followed Robert even after death. After finding the letter, the Martinez family had a decision to make. Do they go to the police with this information? Do they follow through on what Robert wanted and tell the truth? Or do they keep the secret buried like Robert did for 3 decades? Linda made the decision. She said Robert spent 30 years living with this burden. He died with it still weighing on him. She wasn't going to make the same mistake. The family went to the police. They gave them the letter. They explained about the phone calls. The detective who took their statement was named Frank Morrison. Detective Morrison read the letter. Then he read it again. His face was hard to read. When he finished, he looked at Linda and said something that made her blood run cold. He said, "Mrs. Martinez, you're the 4th family this month to come in with a story like this." Linda didn't understand. The 4th family? Detective Morrison explained. Over the past 6 months, there had been reports. Lots of them. Families receiving phone calls from deceased relatives. Always at night. Always at similar times. Always with messages. Sometimes the messages were just words of love. Goodbyes that never got said. But other times, like with the Martinez family, the messages were confessions. Secrets. Information about old crimes. Unsolved cases. Detective Morrison had a file on his desk. A thick file. Inside were reports from 17 different families across 6 states. Detective Sarah Chin in Philadelphia was working on a similar case. That's how she got involved. After Patricia Williams reported those 17 calls from her dead son Marcus, Sarah started doing research. She found Detective Morrison's file. She found reports from Texas, Ohio, Oregon, Florida. Everywhere she looked, there were families reporting the same thing. Calls from deceased relatives. Sarah decided to look for patterns. She made a spreadsheet. She listed every case she could find. Date of death. Date of first call. Time of first call. Duration. Content. What she found was disturbing. Every single case started after March 1, 2018. Before that date, there were no reports anywhere of this phenomenon. Something changed in March 2018. Sarah looked at what happened that month. Was there a solar flare? Some kind of electromagnetic event? A satellite malfunction? She couldn't find anything unusual. Then she noticed something else. The times of the calls. They weren't random. Linda Martinez got calls at 2:23 a.m. Patricia Williams got calls at 3:47 a.m. A family in Texas got calls at 4:15 a.m. But when Sarah converted these times to universal time, accounting for time zones, she realized something strange. They were all happening at the exact same moment. 7:23 a.m. universal time. Every single call. Across every time zone. At precisely the same moment. That couldn't be a coincidence. Sarah dug deeper. She contacted phone companies. She talked to technology experts. She spoke with scientists who study electromagnetic phenomena. Nobody had an explanation. The calls were real. The phone records proved it. But the source of the calls was untraceable. When phone companies tried to track where the calls originated, they hit dead ends. The signals seemed to come from nowhere. Or everywhere. One telecommunications engineer Sarah spoke with said something that stuck with her. He said modern cell phone networks are incredibly complex. Millions of signals bouncing off towers and... By September 2019, the phenomenon had spread. It wasn't just a few families anymore. It was hundreds. Then thousands. Support groups formed online. Websites were created where people could share their experiences. The story hit the news. First local stations. Then national networks. Everyone wanted to know about the calls from the dead. Scientists were baffled. Religious leaders had conflicting interpretations. Some said it was proof of an afterlife. Others said it was demonic. Still others said it was just technology we don't understand yet. The government got involved. The FCC launched an investigation. The FBI opened a task force. But nobody could explain it. Nobody could stop it. And the calls kept coming. More families every day. Sarah Chun became something of an expert. She was interviewed on news programs. She spoke at conferences. Everyone wanted to know what she thought. Sarah was honest. She said she didn't know what was happening. But she knew it was real. She'd heard the recordings. She'd seen the phone records. She'd talked to dozens of families. These people weren't lying. They weren't crazy. Something was happening that nobody could explain. In October 2019, Sarah got a call herself. Not from someone dead. From a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez was a physicist at MIT. She'd been studying the phenomenon. She had a theory. A terrifying theory. Dr. Vasquez believed that in March 2018, something changed in Earth's electromagnetic field. A subtle change. So subtle that most instruments didn't detect it. But enough of a change to alter how signals move through the atmosphere. She believed that human consciousness, at the moment of death, releases a burst of electromagnetic energy. Most of the time, this energy just dissipates into the universe. But Dr. Vasquez thought that maybe, just maybe, some of that energy gets trapped. Caught in the networks we've built. The millions of miles of cable and fiber optic and radio waves that wrap around our PLA. Today, as I write this, the calls continue. Families all over the world report contact from deceased relatives. The patterns remain the same. Specific times. Similar messages. Some calls are comforting. Final I love yous. Apologies that needed to be made. Forgiveness that was never asked for in life. But other calls are disturbing. Warnings about things to come. Information that shouldn't be known. Secrets that were supposed to stay buried. The Martinez family still gets calls from Robert. Not every night anymore. But sometimes. Always at 2:23 a.m. Always just a few words. Linda says she's not afraid anymore. She's grateful. She got to say goodbye properly. She got to forgive him for the secret he kept. She got closure. But not everyone gets closure. Patricia Williams in Philadelphia still gets calls from her son Marcus. 17 calls that first night. Now it's down to 1 call a week. Sometimes Marcus says he loves her. Sometimes he says he's sorry he died. Sometimes he just breathes. Patricia doesn't know if these calls will ever stop. She doesn't know if she wants them to stop. Because as strange as it is, as impossible as it seems, these calls are all she has left of her son. Detective Sarah Chun closed her official investigation in December 2019. She wrote a report. Over 300 pages. Documenting every case she could find. Every pattern she discovered. Every theory she explored. The report was classified. The public has never seen it. But Sarah knows what she wrote on the last page. She wrote, "We are not alone. The dead are still with us. They're trying to tell us something. And I don't think we're ready to hear it." Since then, new cases pop up every day. Reddit forums are filled with people sharing their experiences. YouTube has thousands of videos claiming to have recordings of calls from the dead. Some are real. Most are fake. But the phenomenon continues. Scientists still can't explain it. The government has quietly closed their investigations. They know who is calling. And they know that something changed in March 2018. Something that opened a door. A door between the living and the dead. A door that might never close. So tonight, if your phone rings at an unusual hour, you might want to check the caller ID. Because it might be someone you knew. Someone you loved. Someone who isn't supposed to be able to call anymore. And if you answer, you might hear something that changes everything you thought you knew about death. About life. About what comes after. The question isn't whether the dead can call us. They can. They do. The question is why. What are they trying to tell us? And are we brave enough to listen?